Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. It is Monday, April 3rd, and I am back in the host chair today after a very, very interesting spring break in New York City, where I literally witnessed the indictment of Donald Trump outside of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. It wasn't what I expected my time in New York City to turn out, but it happened, and together we're all witnessing history as Donald Trump is now the first former president in American history to be indicted for committing crimes. And here is what we know so far. Trump has been indicted for his crimes. He is scheduled to fly from Florida to New York today at noon, according to his latest Truth Social post. And tomorrow he will turn himself into the courthouse to be arraigned. Again, this is on every level. I know this word gets used a lot, but this time it's really true. This is unprecedented in American history. And to help me make sense of all of this and why it's so significant, I'm grateful to be joined by MSNBC legal analyst and someone who has helped me, and I know all of us, understand the legal news so much better. And he is, of course, Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, it's so great to see you, and thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Good morning, Victor. Nice to be back with you.
So I have so many questions for you because this is, on one hand, I think, a bit of a sad moment for our country, but it's also a moment that's been long awaited for, and I think really kind of marks what accountability and justice feels like. And you've been a long advocate for justice and accountability and defending democracy. So I just want to ask, how do you view the Trump indictment, not just legally, but also in the broader context of the rule of law and democracy?
You know, typically indictments are not something to be celebrated. Indictments of former presidents of the United States, it's really not something that we should rejoice because it's now been done for the first time. And yet I think we are urged to celebrate accountability and are urged to celebrate perhaps a return to justice, or at least America turning a corner and no longer giving high government officials a pass for their criminal conduct, is so important that, this is going to sound a little Pollyanna-ish, but I tweeted out earlier today, it really feels like morning in America, perhaps in a different way than Ronald Reagan meant it when he said it. What I think is the most important takeaway from a former criminal president of the United States being indicted is never again can a president sort of rest comfortably in the belief that they can commit crimes with impunity, because now we have a concrete example cutting against that. So this is an important step forward for America and for our democracy.
Absolutely. And let's briefly walk our audience through what we know so far. There's a lot we don't know, but some of the reporting is that Trump may have up to 34 charges against him in this Manhattan grand jury case. If that's true, tell us what that means. That seems like a lot of charges.
It is a lot of charges. I hate to speculate, and my magic 8-ball is in the shop for repairs right now, but it seems like you're going to have a series of charges that relate directly or directly involve the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, which was an effort to bury deeply damaging information about Donald Trump from the American voters in 2016. I suspect you're going to see a number of other crimes that sort of spin out of the hush money scheme. They may be tax crimes, because we've seen reporting that Donald Trump fraudulently took these payments as business deductions or legal fees. Those would be crimes both under the laws of New York, and they would be federal crimes. So I'm hoping that at some point we're going to see a federal indictment for some of Donald Trump's tax crimes, which seems to this old prosecutor like shooting fish in a barrel when it comes to proving up those violations of federal law. You're also probably going to see some campaign finance crimes in violation of both New York state law and federal law. But I really am very anxious to read this 30-plus count indictment, which is what the reporting tells us, to see precisely what Alvin Bragg believes the evidence can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The one thing I'm most interested in, Victor, is if we're going to see a conspiracy count that might involve other players. We already know Michael Cohen is a co-conspirator because he pleaded guilty and was imprisoned as a result of committing these crimes at the direction of, and for the benefit of his co-conspirator, Donald Trump. But I'm interested to see if we have Alan Weisselberg, David Pecker, or others referenced in this indictment, either as an unindicted co-conspirator or perhaps something else.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting. And I know Katie Fang was on over the weekend, and she's been saying that one of the things that she'll be looking for is what story does this tell? And I think it'll be interesting to see what names are mentioned, what the different charges are. But I'm wondering next, what is next for Trump in this case? He posted something last night on his Truth Social platform about how he's flying into Manhattan today. What should we expect from here in terms of the criminal proceeding?
You know, tomorrow is going to be far more consequential than the run-of-the-mill arraignment. I've been involved in hundreds of arraignment hearings. They usually take about 5 minutes, and here's what they typically look like. The defendant will be arraigned on the charges. That's a fancy term for being put on notice of precisely what he'll have to defend against. Now, ordinarily, that will involve reading of the indictment unless the defense attorney waives formal reading of the indictment, which happens, in my experience, about 98% of the time, because defendants typically don't want to sit there while the clerk of the court reads a lengthy indictment. So we'll see if his attorneys waive formal reading of the indictment. They will then enter a not guilty plea on behalf of their client. And then I think they're going to turn to the all-important discussion of what to do with Donald Trump pending trial. Now, certainly he will be released. He's not going to be detained pending trial. But I think the judge should take up the topic of a possible limitation on his speech or on his posts on the internet, on social media, because he has already tried to poison the well, to poison the jury pool. He has thrown disinformation bombs into the public square about Alvin Bragg, about Alvin Bragg's wife. And what is perhaps the most troubling, now it's really troubling that he threatened Alvin Bragg by posting a picture of him holding a baseball bat mid-swing about to hit, a picture of the very person prosecuting him. But what he posted about Judge Marchand is even more troubling, and in some ways it's more troubling. And I think it will be a topic of discussion tomorrow, because he said, first of all, Judge Marchand hates me. Well, that is almost certainly untrue. He said, Judge Marchand was handpicked as the judge by Alvin Bragg. That is absolutely untrue. That's not how judicial assignments happen. And then he said what is the most troubling, in my opinion. He said, Judge Marchand, quote, railroaded Alan Weisselberg into pleading guilty by threatening him with enhanced punishment if he didn't plead guilty, even though he's not guilty. That is a direct accusation of judicial misconduct, if not judicial obstruction of justice. That must be addressed. There must be some limitations placed on Donald Trump's speech. And then, Victor, once those limitations are in place, how many of us think Donald Trump will comply with those limitations?
Right. I mean, that is just truly revolting on so many levels. And I want to ask you maybe a two-part question here, which is, first, we mentioned Judge Marchand. What do we know about Judge Marchand? And second, we mentioned the limitations on Trump's speech. And I have to ask you about Trump's Truth Social tweet about how after his arraignment, he's going to go back to Mar-a-Lago and address the nation, which I don't even know what that means, but address the nation. Is there some sort of gag order that you think Judge Marchand is going to impose on Trump to prevent him from doing that?
I hope so. I wouldn't call it a gag order. I would call it conditions on his release. There should be a narrowly tailored set of prohibitions or limitations about what Trump can and can't say. He can talk about his case. He can talk about, I'm innocent. He can say, I'm going to vigorously defend the charges and I will be vindicated. What he can't do is threaten people. Yeah. He cannot put disinformation, lies in the public square designed to poison the jury pool. Here's the thing, Victor. We always talk about the rights of the defendant to a fair trial. For 30 years as a prosecutor, I not only fought to hold folks accountable for their crimes, I also fought to protect the rights of every defendant that I prosecuted. But the people also have a right to a fair trial. The people of New York, by extension, the people of the United States, have a right to a fair trial. That's why defendants aren't permitted to threaten prosecutors or lie about judges. He will be permitted to give all sorts of speeches, political or otherwise, but I'm hoping Judge Marchand puts some narrowly tailored conditions on what he can and can't say, what he can and can't post, so he's not permitted to damage the prospect of a fair trial in New York.
Yeah. Have you interacted with Judge Marchand at all? And if so, what is he like, or based off of what you know about him?
No, I never practiced in New York. My 30 plus years as a prosecutor came first as an Army JAG prosecuting court-martial cases beginning back in the 80s, and then moving to the Department of Justice, where for a quarter of a century, I tried cases in the courts of Washington, D.C., both federally and locally. Everything I've heard about Judge Marchand, including from some of my friends who have appeared before him, is that he is a straight shooter. He is no nonsense. He will call it the way he sees it. He'll call balls and strikes. He'll rule in favor of the defendant if that's what the law dictates. He'll rule in favor of the prosecution if that's how he should rule. He presided over the Trump Organization criminal trial well and efficiently and effectively by all accounts. So I think it's a good draw for the prosecution because it's a good draw for the rule of law.
Absolutely. I have one other question about this, which is Cyrus Vance Jr. yesterday, who was the former Manhattan DA before Alvin Bragg, was on Jen Psaki yesterday, and he didn't mince words about Donald Trump's comments about Alvin Bragg and Judge Marchand, and he suggested the possibility of there might be an obstruction of a criminal proceeding in this. What do you think of that? How likely is that?
Yeah, I've done a video or two on this. When I saw his post swinging a baseball bat at a picture of Alvin Bragg, I immediately dug into the New York criminal code, and I think it's 195.05, which is they have an unusual name for their obstructing justice under these circumstances. They call it the interfering in governmental administration or something like that. But if you try to intimidate or interfere in the official duties of a government official in New York, for example, a district attorney, that's a criminal offense under the laws of New York. Importantly, there's also a federal crime that applies directly to Donald Trump's baseball bat post, and it is transmitting a threat in interstate commerce. That's a fancy term for posting it on the internet. It used to mean calling somebody on the phone and threatening them back in the day. Now it means posting something on the internet. That is a 5-year federal felony, and it doesn't have to be intimidation of a government official. It is merely transmitting a threat to harm another in interstate commerce. And Victor, I hope to heck that my friends, my former colleagues at the Department of Justice and on Jack Smith's team, some of my former homicide prosecutors are on that team. I hope to heck they are preparing to indict Donald Trump for a violation of federal law for that.
Wow, that's really interesting. So on that note, there are other investigations too. Yesterday, there was some new reporting from the Washington Post about how Jack Smith and his team have new evidence that suggests that perhaps Donald Trump obstructed justice in the Mar-a-Lago case. Talk about some of the other cases and whether or not you think this Manhattan indictment will be the first, or I guess will be the last of what comes to Trump.
No, I think it will be the first of many indictments. I think we'll see an indictment coming out of Fulton County, Georgia, where District Attorney Fani Willis seems to be in the final throes, moving toward an indictment. I think you'll see multiple federal indictments, a number of charges for the insurrection, a number of charges for the classified documents crimes at Mar-a-Lago. And I was thrilled to see the Washington Post reporting yesterday about how it looks like Jack Smith's team has evidence that Donald Trump put hands on the documents after the grand jury, as part of a criminal investigation, had subpoenaed, demanded that they be returned. The reporting yesterday was that boxes were then transferred from the storage facility so Donald Trump could rummage through them, inferentially seeing what he wanted to keep. And then after that, an FBI search warrant was executed and more than 100 additional classified documents were seized because he retained them unlawfully. That's obstruction of justice. I think we could see federal charges brought for the classified documents case literally in the coming weeks, certainly in the coming months.
And it wasn't even just Washington Post. He was on Sean Hannity last night, and he like he said the quiet part out loud, which is just so, I mean, absurd. And I, it's every single time he and his lawyers go on TV, I think that they make the case worse for them.
And it is of such evidentiary value what he said on Hannity. I would take a copy of that video, slap a government exhibit sticker, and introduce it as incriminating evidence to the jury, because he said, I would do that. I would look through those documents. Hannity actually said, well, let's move on. He said, no, let's not. Do you know Richard Nixon got $18 million for the documents that he retained? I mean, this is insanity, and the case against him gets stronger by the day.
Yeah. So I have one last question for you, which is, I know you talk to a lot of students, you teach a lot of young people. How do you hope the young people listening to this show view that what's happening right now? It's such a crazy time. And what do you hope young people take away from this?
Yeah, because I teach at George Washington University, undergraduate criminal justice, arrest through appeal, I feel obligated to talk about the legal issues of the day in a way that does not conjure up politics at all, as best I can keep from doing that. But, somebody once asked me what leaves you optimistic, and it's my students that leave me optimistic, because really, to a person, over the course of the last 8 or 9 semesters that I've taught criminal justice, the students seem determined to fix what's broken in our government, in our criminal justice system. And, some of them, I think, have a hard time processing what they're seeing, the kind of behavior from high government officials, but they take it so seriously, and they seem so determined to dig in and fix what our generation either broke or was unable to fix ourselves, that it really leaves me optimistic for our future.
Yeah. Well, this is, I think, sends a strong message to every young person out there that the rule of law and democracy are still intact. Glenn, thank you so much for joining me this morning. And thank you always for helping us understand what is such a crazy, crazy legal, news week and era. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Victor, and for the work that you're doing to inspire and energize Gen Z, because y'all are the ones that are going to have to do it.
Yeah, a lot of pressure, but thank you so much, Glenn. Well, Glenn is always a good person to have on to talk about all the legal news of the day, and there is no shortage of that. As I mentioned on this episode, yesterday there was some new reporting from the Washington Post, which if you haven't look at it, you should definitely do so. It is a pretty damning report for Donald Trump. And also, I mean, just even Donald Trump, like we said, he admitted to Sean Hannity that he moved and took classified information at Mar-a-Lago for him to see it. So it's just, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. A couple of other things I want to get to before I let you all go for the day. The first is yesterday there was some really disturbing stuff on TV, which is that Leslie Stahl gave Marjorie Taylor Greene a platform on 60 Minutes. It was one of those moments where you wonder, I mean, the media is literally failing us right now. And it would be one thing if, I'm not opposed to someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene going on TV, but so long as the interviewer pushes back. So someone like Jon Stewart, for instance, you think of any great interviewer out there and how they're able to handle Republicans. The way they're able to do it is that they push back with facts. They push back with logic. They don't let them get away with saying nonsense and lies. But yesterday, that's exactly what Leslie Stahl did on 60 Minutes. I only watch clips on Twitter, but if any of you guys watched it, it was one of those moments where, I mean, Leslie Stahl, literally, there were moments where she asked Marjorie Taylor Greene about, Democrats being pedophiles. And the only thing she could say is, wow, and she rolled her eyes. That's not pushing back. That's literally giving Marjorie Taylor Greene more of a platform to spread lies and misinformation. I think for anyone who cares about democracy, what's happening with the media, where you have a lot of these media companies, CBS, or I guess 60 Minutes is owned by CBS, where it's all about attention. It's all about profit. That's what drives, their decisions. And I think it's really doing a disservice to all of us when you have someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's able to go on a great service or great broadcast platform like CBS and 60 Minutes, and basically spread lies and promote the same old things that she's been saying. And it's embarrassing and also humiliating for the media. But I really hope that, if the media learns anything from this, it's that if you're going to interview one of those people, you have to push back. Otherwise, you have a lot of people who are dying to go on 60 Minutes, people who tell the truth, people who actually believe in the rule of law and democracy, who would want to go on 60 Minutes and elevate their profile, but yet they give someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene free reign to lie. And I think it's just despicable, and another instance of our media failing us. One other thing that I thought was pretty interesting yesterday, as I mentioned on this show just a little while ago, yesterday Manhattan DA, or former Manhattan DA, Cyrus Vance Jr. was on Jen Psaki's show, and he basically said that, quote, what Trump is saying is wrong on every level. It's a terrible judgment. And I think this is what we were trying to get at with Glenn Kirschner, is that there could be an obstruction of a criminal proceeding here, which is significant too. So it's like every single time he and his lawyers go on TV, they somehow make the case worse for them. And there has to be someone who can rein them in, but I guess not. And the one other thing is Asa Hutchinson, who was the former governor of Arkansas, had announced yesterday to John Carl and ABC that he will be running for president in 2024. He called Trump to drop out of the race. He has previously said that anyone or any Republican who supports the January 6th insurrection doesn't deserve a place in office. He's someone who, I will admit, has basically had more of a spine than most of the Republican Party. He has been someone who has not been afraid to call out Trump and other Republicans for what they have been doing to the Republican Party. But I do also want to remind everyone that this isn't someone who is necessarily the sanest when it comes to policies. I was looking at his record, and during his time as governor in Arkansas, he signed a bill into law that criminalized abortion in the event that Roe v. Wade fell. He rolled back emergency medical treatment for the LGBT community. He enacted stricter voter ID laws to make it harder for people to vote. This is someone who hasn't really, been the sanest when it comes to policy. So for anyone who thinks that, he's someone who is courageous and brave to stand up to Trump, sure, that might be the case, but also we can't overlook all of his dangerous policies that he's been doing. Clearly, these are things that would roll back basic fundamental civil rights. And I think it's for all of us, we should be paying attention to this and not be glorifying him. I know this is going to be a very, very busy week for all of us, and I'm lucky that I will be joined by some amazing guests these next few days to help us make sense of this week. Tomorrow, I'll be joined by Charlotte Clymer, who is a wonderful activist who talks about just the attacks on the LGBTQ community. She's going to be joining me tomorrow to talk about the latest attack on trans people in the wake of the Nashville shooting. On Wednesday, I will be joined by Delegate Stacey Plaskett, and she had a bit of a moment last week when she basically was mansplained by a sitting Republican member of Congress who gave her a document, who basically slapped a document on her desk. And she walked it back over to the Republican member of Congress during a live testimony and basically gave it back to him. And it was just one of those moments where, this is Democrats really showing that they're not going to tolerate what Republicans are doing. And so we're going to have on Delegate Plaskett to talk about that, but also her time being the lead Democrat on the weaponization of government subcommittee and what it's like to go against someone like Jim Jordan. So you don't want to miss that. On Thursday, we'll be joined by Ethan Wolf, who is one of my friends. He's a Gen Z activist. He runs if you might have seen the Twitter account Biden Wins, he'll talk about what it'll take to get Gen Zers united around President Biden, what the messaging should be going forward to reach young people. And then on Friday, I know I'm going to have on one of your favorites, Rick Wilson, who will talk to me about the craziness with the Republican Party in light of everything going on with the Manhattan DA and also all of these committees. We'll talk about that with him. You don't want to miss those. They're going to be at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, right here on youtube.com/Politicon. Don't miss them. We'll be live every day. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And it'll be a very, very interesting week. Tomorrow will be the arraignment of Donald Trump. It's going to be historic, and I will be here every step along the way. I'm grateful for all of you and your voice, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Monday.